Hello, everybody. My name is Mercedes Franco, and I'm here to talk about high impact practices in the mathematics classroom. What difference do they make? So for those of you who may not be familiar with these practices, I'm going to try to explain what high impact practices are. I will also try to share what were the factors that motivated me to start using high impact practices in my own teaching. I will share some of the assessments that I have conducted that try to demonstrate what is the impact that they have on student learning. And last, I hope to be able to motivate some of you to start using high impact practices in your own classrooms, and more importantly, to start assessing and sharing your results with the mathematics community. Now, in a nutshell, high impact practices are simply pedagogical practices or teaching and learning strategies that are known to promote student engagement, satisfaction, acquisition of desired knowledge, skills, competencies. They are supposed to be effective in terms of persistence toward degree and in general attainment of educational goals. The person that coined this term is George Koo, and he had a book about high impact practices that came out in 2008. And that was kind of what revolutionized the conversation about effective teaching and learning practices. Now, none of these practices were actually new. He did not design or develop a new strategy. What he did was he recognized that of all the teaching and learning strategies out there, some of them seem to have a deeper effect on student learning. And he discovered this as he was working with data from the National Survey of Student Engagement. And those practices that he recognized back in 2008 were actually 10 practices. The practices were capstone courses and projects, collaborative assignments and projects, the common intellectual experience, diversity and global learning, first-year seminars or experiences, internships, learning communities, service learning, community-based learning, they come together either one, undergraduate research and writing intensive courses. And then e-portfolios was the 11th pedagogical practice that he identified as a high impact practice, but that one came out a few years later. Now, what makes a practice in general a high impact practice? Well, in 2013, he and O'Donnell, and when I say he, I'm still referring to George Koo, they identified key elements that seem to be relatively common among the high impact practices. And I also feel that these are the elements that make these practices highly effective. And the effect of these practices is something that they call deep approaches to learning. And part of the initial research in 2008 was highlighting that because of these deep approaches to learning, the students learn better, basically, the material, and they are able to integrate it, retain it, or even transfer information at higher rates than when they are learning through different styles or delivery methods. Okay, by going back to the 8 key elements or characteristics of practices that are then recognizable as having a high impact on learning. They are setting performance expectations at the appropriate high level and also being very transparent about those expectations with the students. Usually when people are implementing these practices with high fidelity, they really plan for experiences where a significant investment of time and effort is required on the part of the students, and this also happens over an extended period of time. Interactions with faculty and peers tend to be also more intense and also about substantive matters. Experiences with diversity, really putting students in a situation where they have to really contend with people or circumstances that are very different with the things they are already familiar with. Providing feedback, frequently, timely, and constructive feedback. Structuring opportunities for students to reflect and integrate learning, and doing this periodically. Creating opportunities for students to discover the relevance of the learning through real-world applications or authentic, right, applications. and also to setting opportunities for students to demonstrate their competencies, whether it is to public presentations, a report, a poster, or the like. Now, how did I get involved with high impact practices? Well, when I finished my PhD in 2005, my first and only job was this tenure track position at Queensborough Community College. Queensborough Community College is one of the campuses of the City University of New York, also known as CUNY. CUNY is the largest urban university system in the nation. Now, our community college in particular has an open admission access policy, as well as a commitment to academic excellence. And because it wants to fulfill this commitment to both academic excellence and open admissions, they have developed a culture that is very supportive of innovative pedagogies. They have the structures to support the faculty. They also reward the work that people do in this area as part of the reappointment, tenure, and promotion process on campus. Over the years, Queensborough has institutionalized 6 of the 11 high impact practices. And Queensborough started this work even before the term HIPS was coined. I remember when I joined in 2005, the college already had a graduation requirement that every student needed to take 2 writing intensive courses in order to graduate. This is actually a CUNY-wide policy or graduation requirement. In 2006, I was one of the faculty who secured external funding, and we were able to bring academic service learning to campus. It was institutionalized in 2009. But again, that's an example of something that started before the work by George Q was known, right? So there was that tradition already, but then certainly it accelerated with the new knowledge and the new research that was coming out once the term HIP was coined and everybody really started to look at these practices in more detail. So as a member of this campus, I have received professional development and have implemented 4 of these high impact practices. They were, or they are, because I still use them, writing intensive courses, academic service learning. The common intellectual experience that we use on campus is called the Common Read, and undergraduate research. And for undergraduate research, we have the 2 modalities. We have both the research in the classroom as well as the more traditional apprenticeship model. And I have implemented undergraduate research in both formats. Let me say a little bit more about my campus. Queensborough Community College used to have a very small number of Native Americans. It used to be less than 1%. And then the other groups were nearly equal. So we have about 25% whites, Hispanics, Blacks, and Asians. The numbers have shifted a little bit, and the most updated data about a student demographic is on the screen right now. We actually have increased the number of students of colors pretty much in every identity group, and the number of Caucasians or whites have actually decreased. But we are a very diverse campus. We have the HSI designation, among other things. Now, our students come from more than 117 countries, speak 63 languages, 24% are actually foreign born. 25% of our students, current students, report speaking a language other than English at home. The numbers used to be higher. The last time I checked, I remember we have about students from about 130 countries, and even more reported speaking a language other than English at home. But the enrollment patterns have changed a little bit since the pandemic. Nowadays, about 7% of the incoming freshmen require at least 1 remedial course. This is also a big change. We used to have 45% of freshmen requiring remediation in 1, 2, or 3, or in 1 or 2 of the disciplines, math or English. But this has changed dramatically. Some of it is enrollment patterns. Some of it is also changes on how we place students when they first arrive. They are no longer placed based on an examination. Now the university, is university-wide, uses a combination of data, like grades and GPA from high school, the New York State test scores, SATs for students who might have them. So there are alternatives to placement that seem to be working better. So anyway, the data that we have on the screen is the most recent one. I also want to mention that many of our students qualify for financial aid. And these numbers have actually gone up since the pandemic. So you can imagine that not only I was in a campus that was very open and supportive about pedagogy, but also that we have real needs, right? We have a student body that has a lot of, that requires a lot of need and requires really for people to excel on how they try to promote teaching and learning in their classrooms. And we have the data coming out saying that high impact practices were actually very effective for any student, but it was particularly effective for students traditionally underserved in academic settings and in higher education. So first generation students, transfer students, Hispanics, Blacks, these were students who were very likely to benefit the most, but also likely to participate in HIPs at lower rates than their peers. So there was that added incentive to start using high impact practices in my classroom. So over the years at Queensborough, I implemented high impact practices in a wide range of courses. So from college algebra to 400 level courses like discrete math or probability for our math or STEM majors. And basically, I have a summary of what I perceive are the benefits of high impact practices. And I presented that summary back in 2015 in a post in the teaching and learning blog of the AMS. But at the time, when I wrote the blog post, I actually was trusting that our institution will start assessing high impact practices across the board. So I was really, really hopeful that, okay, we're all very excited, we're using these things, they definitely represent more work for everybody involved, for students and faculty, but we want to see the results. And I was trusting our institution will help us, right, make those assessments. And they did. In 2015, they actually included HIPs in their college-wide assessment of general education outcomes. In addition, I just happened that semester to be using other assessments in one of my classes where I have incorporated 2 of the high impact practices. The class was a statistics course for non-majors. It's like a mid-level course, 300 level. And I was incorporating a project focused on human rights that I have developed a year earlier. So this was my second implementation. And the HIPs on it, as I mentioned, were WI, writing intensive course, but also it was going to have a strong undergraduate research component. I had 22 students that particular semester in the course. I have the students taking the Lopato surveys for course-based undergraduate research experiences. 20 of the students participated and completing the surveys. 19 of the student papers were submitted to the college for the general education assessment of student artifacts. And then in addition, I was using my own assessment tools and reflections. Now, this graph that I have on the screen right now is coming from the survey, the CURE survey from Lopato. And in this survey, he is reporting, right, my students' responses to questions about their gains. Like, how much do you think you gain because of you participated in this course? And it basically goes over different components that are typical in course-based undergraduate research courses. So it reports those numbers reported by the students, but it also makes a comparison with what students across the nation who are participating in course-based undergraduate research at their institutions and are taking the same survey. It compares my student responses to them. So basically to the national pool of students using the survey at the time. So my student responses of the ratings of their gains are in red. And I must say that I was very glad to see that some of the key elements of the research experience that I embedded in the course are actually reflected on what the students self-reported in this survey. And again, this survey is an external, right, tool. It's administered directly by Lopato. The students are simply given the website and they sign up. They don't even have to sign up, but they click and it's their choice to complete the survey. And they did an amazing job. So I just want to mention that some of the things that I was very proud to see was a student giving high points to their sense of having improved in terms of presenting results in written papers or reports, collecting and analyzing data. They also reported big gains in terms of working individually and working as a whole class and working as a group, among other things. This second graph is also from the report that I received from having used the Lopato survey cure. Once again, it's the same idea. The items in red represent my students' responses, and they are being compared to the responses of all the students who took the survey at the time, most of whom are actually from four-year colleges and universities. Lopato didn't have a benchmark for community colleges because he had not had enough participation from community college students in the past that would have allowed him to develop a benchmark, if different, right, from the national one. But anyway, the comparison here is with everybody else in the nation. And once again, the students were very good at recognizing some of the gains from the actual nature of the research experience. I'm just going to highlight a few. For example, they gave high marks to skills in interpreting results, tolerance for obstacles that are faced in the research process, also understanding how knowledge is constructed, understanding the research process, understanding how scientists work, becoming part of a learning community, learning to work independently, learning ethical conduct. So these are some of the items that the students have scored the highest, again, in terms of what they felt they gained because of participation in this course. So I was very pleased with these results. In addition, as I mentioned, I have my student papers submitted and participating in the college-wide assessment of the general education learning outcome for analytic reasoning. Well, in all, the college reviewed 478 student artifacts. They were rated using a rubric. These 478 student artifacts came from a total of 39 classes from across the disciplines. They made a distinction. 23 of those classes that entered the assessment were actual classes where a high impact practice was incorporated. And then the other 16 classes were just regular courses that did not have any high impact practice integrated into the course. Well, to my surprise, and I was very happy to see that, the artifacts from my statistics class score on average the highest in all dimensions of the rubric for analytic reasoning. And then the third assessment tool that I used that particular semester is based on a tool that I developed for use in class. I always encourage the students to reflect on the process. It's actually part of implementing high impact practices, right? The reflection component. So anyway, there were a different type of questions that I asked the students. One of them was simply to say whether or not they recognize that the research experience was directly linked to course material of content. And to my surprise, only 47% of the students say yes to that, which was a surprise because the human rights project that they did was 100% linked to the chapter about regression that we have to cover in the course. And we actually covered concurrently as they were working on the project. So that was a surprise. However, other things that the students reported in this particular tool were very, very pleasing and also consistent with some of the things that they reported on the CURE survey. So I have about 2/3 of the students agreeing or strongly agreeing that participation in research helped them in multiple ways, like better understanding the material, right, from lectures and readings, make them more responsible for their own learning, made them aware of the role that mathematics plays in other disciplines or in majors other than their own majors. About 3/4 or a little bit more than 3/4 agree or strongly agree that the research experience helped them to see the course material and how it can be used in real life situations or everyday life. So that was also a very valuable aspect of the experience for them. Now, I also have open questions, and here are 2 examples. I asked them to cite 2 things that they learned in the course. It was a very open-ended question. It could be anything. And here are the most cited responses. Many students cited use of technology, like they felt that they gained or learned a lot. Yes, they also, some of them mentioned having learned course content. In fact, the content directly related to the project, that was correlation and regression. There were students who mentioned other topics that they felt were also enhanced because of the project that they did. Some people noted that they felt they learned a lot about human rights, or more than they knew before. And also there were students who reported benefits in the area of information literacy, like how to find sources, how to recognize if a source is to be trusted, things like that. Another open-ended question that I asked the students have to do with connections between the project that we did in class and the scientific method. And I wanted to know if the students really were distilling, right? Like, oh, this is what scientists do. This is the disciplinary way of doing things. Like if they really were able to extract from the experience things that sort of belong to this more general template, right? Of how people actually do research. So anyway, some of the responses that they gave, the ones that came out more frequently, spoke about data collection or information gathering, which was great again, because that was a very large component of the project. Posing a hypothesis, analyzing data, interpreting results, or drawing conclusions were also 2 items that came up relatively often. Posing questions. And then there are 2 more that are part of the scientific method: observation and communicating results. So I was again pleased to see that things had really stayed right in the students' minds. But what happened? What happened was the college stopped assessing high impact practices. They continue to this day to conduct assessments of general education outcomes. They continue to ask faculty to volunteer student artifacts for these assessments every year. However, they no longer distinguish courses that have 1 or more high impact practices incorporated versus courses that are taught in more traditional ways. So I lost that opportunity to have basically the institution do some of the labor, right, involved in trying to know if these practices actually make any difference. And I wasn't as worried about it. I was interested, but I wasn't as worried about the impact of high impact practices until 2018. In 2018, I actually took a look at all my record of teaching at the institution, and I was absolutely surprised to realize, because I did not know this, I was not aware, about 50% of the courses that I have taught at the college since I was hired and up to that point, 2018, 50% of the courses have had at least 1 high impact practice, more often 2 or more. And for anybody who has experience with high impact practices, that's a lot of work. So I decided right there and then, I need to know if this is actually worth it. It's like, this is so much work. I believe it's worth it. My perception is that this does make a difference. I have seen the difference in terms of student attitudes, participation and engagement in the classroom. But at the same time, it was more perceived than anything else. I haven't done enough rigorous assessments, number 1. I have not looked at the impact on academic performance. I did not have a perception that the grades were necessarily stronger or higher or better. But I also wanted to know, does it have a longer impact? I mean, they might be doing better or engaging more in my class, but do they take with them any other gains? But also, let's look at the academic component. Am I having an impact that can be measured with the traditional measures of academic performance, basically? So I set out myself to study this. Let me look at the impact of all these years of teaching. Of course, I parted from the assumption that I have caused no harm. I really wanted to know as well, I hope I caused no harm, that the students in the courses where I have used HIPS have learned as much or hopefully more, right, than the students who go through more traditional approaches to teaching and learning of mathematics. Okay, so continuing to explain the research project that I launched back in 2018. I started just writing the proposal, getting the IRB approval. It has been a very slow process. So the project was going to be a retrospective data review. I was going to look at both qualitative and quantitative data. It's called historical data because I was looking at classes that I taught in years prior. And in fact, I was looking at courses that I taught between fall 2005, when I started at Queensborough Community College, and the spring of 2017. So it was 12 academic years. And now in those 12 years, I have taught multiple sections of different courses, a total of 14 different courses. And if I combine the sections of these courses that I taught, it was a total of 52 sections of courses. And out of 52, 24 were courses that had at least one high impact practice, but often two or more. And again, this is just a reminder, there were only 4 high impact practices that I have used over the years: writing intensive courses, academic service learning, undergraduate research, and the common intellectual experience, which in our campus is a common read. Now, this table explains a little bit the nature of the work that I've done. So the table on the left shows the 24 sections of courses where I have integrated a high impact practice. And it also points out how many times I use a single HIP, or 2, or 3, or when I was crazy enough to do 4 high impact practices at once. Of course, that was crazy. Never again. And the table on the right-hand side shows all the 14 courses that I was referring to earlier. And it shows that, again, this was me teaching. I wasn't wearing the researcher hat yet. So none of this is coming from a formal experiment where you have the experimental section and then the control section for the intervention that you're trying to assess. Not at all. I'm looking back at my years of teaching. So I know that there are courses that I was able to teach both with or without HIPs, but then there are many other courses that have always been taught with a HIP, or that never had a HIP. So it's gonna be a difficult assessment. However, preliminary findings suggest that even though we're not controlling for things in a traditional way, that we are able to extract valuable information that allow us to compare the student experience in these 2 types of environments: courses with HIPs and courses without. I'll elaborate a little bit more in a second. Now, this is the type of data. This is the type of data that we are looking at from my own records of student evaluations. We're using that to measure a little bit the students' satisfaction with the course. Also from my own records, the records of attendance. And we're looking at that as a measure of engagement, like the students show up to class often enough or not, or persistence, right, in their learning experience. We're looking at academic performance with data from the college. And we requested and received a lot of data that not only reflects on the math class that is being entered into the study, but also the prequel, the sequels. We're also looking at students' remedial status at the time of admission at the college, ESL status, their grades in English 101 and English 102 prior to coming to my math courses. And this sounds strange, but actually there was another assessment that I conducted in fall 2016 with a librarian. And we found that writing intensive courses where the students in the course, a lot of them were ESL students, they did not perform as well as the students in the same writing intensive course that did not have that particular status. So we realized, or I realized, that writing intensive courses may be disadvantaging students who are not yet very strong in their communication skills in English. So of course, the question always is how do we support the students, right? So that they do participate in writing intensive courses, but despite the fact that they don't have the same skill level as other students in the same course. So anyway, but what I'm trying to say is that because of that earlier assessment that I have in just one class, in the past, I'm very aware that these elements could also influence, right, how we interpret the results. So again, ESL status and whether the students have taken English 101 and 102 prior to taking these math classes, and in part because some of the math classes were writing intensive. So we want to have that information at hand so we can use it when it's relevant. And then we're looking at other information like a student's program of study, year in school when they join my classes, GPA, credits earned, degree earned, and also demographic information. So I'm working with a collaborator. He's a colleague of mine. He's at the social sciences department. He's actually somebody who works in the area of psychology. We also recruited undergraduate students who assisted us with this first phase of the project. And then in the first phase, we started digitizing whatever information we had at hand. So I'm going to repeat. We have 52 courses, 24 or 52 sections of courses to be more accurate. And 24 of them had high impact practices, right? But then when it was time to actually get the work done, we realized we needed to eliminate a few classes. So the actual population is whatever number of students we have in 52 sections of courses. However, we enter into the study only the students that corresponded to 48 sections of courses. And the eliminations were based on class sizes that were too small and will make everyone identifiable. And there was also one class that was taught, actually it was taught during the winter term, but the student evaluation was done in electronic form. And I cannot explain why, but the college had a totally different student evaluation form in electronic form compared to the traditional paper student evaluation forms that had been used everywhere else over the years. So we're not using that one, or at least not for this component where the student evaluation of instruction is being included. And again, we digitize whatever information we have at hand. This was happening right when the pandemic was starting. Thanks to the research students, we were able to complete 28 sections of student evaluation data, as well as 26 sessions of attendance data. And we look at, like, what can we say, right? If we just look at these numbers that we have so far. And we did find interesting things. So from looking at the student evaluation data, well, I was surprised. The student evaluations were significantly lower, or in other words, the student evaluation of the instruction was harsher in the HIP courses compared to the courses that I taught without the use of any HIP. And I have the numbers on the screen for the median and standard deviation for the HIP sections, and I put the H next to the median and SD for standard deviation to make it easier for people to compare that one against the median and standard deviation for all the sections that were taught without HIP. So anyway, so the students were more critical, basically, of their experiences in HIP courses versus the students who were in courses that did not use any HIPs. This was also consistent with the qualitative component of the same student evaluation forms. So they come and they have a quantitative part where the students do a ranking, but then there is also a couple, 2 or 3 open-ended questions at the end. And the research students did the sentiment analysis for this qualitative information. And again, consistently, the students in the HIP courses were more critical than the students in the regular courses. So the students in the HIP courses they have both more negative comments and fewer positive comments. Okay. Now, when we look at attendance records and the data that we produce by digitizing attendance records, this was actually nice. So the students are harsher. They don't seem to be as happy with the HIP courses as students are in non-HIP courses. However, the attendance in the HIP courses is better than the attendance in regular courses. So the attendance rate, the average attendance rate in the HIP courses was significantly higher than the attendance rate of students in regular courses. So attendance was better, or another way to see it is that the absences, right, were lower in the HIPs than compared to the non-HIPs. And I have the other statement also in the next slide. So here is the counterpart. In terms of the students being late, it was about the same. Students show up late, I guess, at equal rates, whether the class is a HIP or a non-HIP. So the significant difference was more attendance in HIP classes compared to non-HIPs. In contrast with harsher critique, right, in the student evaluation forms. So we are hopeful that even though we don't have this perfectly set up experiment with control and experimental sections of courses, that even when we look at this data from a cohort study point of view, just put in two buckets, all the HIPs versus all the non-HIP courses, that we're able to extract some information. Now, this is very preliminary in the sense that this was not even the complete data set, right? This was about half of the sections in the study or data from the sections enter into the study. But again, just in summary, we saw that maybe the students being harsher in the student evaluation forms has to do with the fact that courses are more challenging when you have a HIP, and they do require more time and energy and preparation from everybody involved, including the instructor, not just the students, and that this might be reflected on how the students rate the instructor and the experience at the end. And then on the other side, the better attendance rate might be consistent with what we know from literature review, that HIPs indeed benefit students from the point of view of the engagement, right, and persistence. Now, this is work in progress. We have continued to increase, right, the entries in our data set. In particular, we received now all the institutional data that we requested. It's ready in digital form. We finished digitizing all the attendance data for all the sections that were remaining. We are still digitizing student evaluation of instructor data. We're almost there. But then once we're done, we're gonna put everything together. In fact, we started putting things together already. But once we finish, we're gonna be ready to then complete that basic cohort study, just HIPs versus not HIPs, regardless of anything else. Then maybe, if the sample sizes are good enough, maybe we can look at what the data says per specific HIP. What does the data say for writing intensive? Or what does the data say for undergraduate research? Or maybe comparing what does the data said in terms of the impact when only a single HIP was used versus 2 HIPs were used, so on. And then more refinements will be done after that first step. Those refinements will help us basically address potential confound variables. For example, some of the things that we might do is matching members of the two groups, and we might do the matching on an individual basis. Let's say here is a student from a HIP course, and we want to match this student with somebody from the non-HIP, from a non-HIP course that has, let's say, the same GPA and same gender. Or we can also do this analysis by groups. Let's say we look at different sections of the same course, or maybe we group courses by level, the 100 level courses versus 200, 300, 400 level. So we'll see what will be those refinements, but we're definitely going to start with that more general and simple cohort study. And something that we can also do, looking at the student evaluation of instruction, especially the qualitative part, where the students actually use words to tell you what they like or didn't like, is to see if some of the things that they are writing actually has to do with the implementation of the HIP. Because I know that many of my students, and that's across the board, always complain about my review for exams. They always think that I don't give them enough information in preparation for exams, for example, because they like when you give them the actual questions, like these are the sample type of questions you're gonna get. I'm not as likely to give them sample questions, but I do my review sessions. But anyway, I know that's something that they usually complain about. So see, I want to be able to separate things that had to do with my teaching philosophy or style versus things that were inherent to the HIP that was being implemented in that particular course at that particular time. And then last, as I said in the outline of the presentation, I really want more people to start using high impact practices and also start assessing high impact practices. We actually don't have enough research about the use of high impact practices in general in the mathematics classroom, and then we also don't have enough research about high impact practices at community colleges. So addressing any community college faculty who might be listening to the presentation, as you well know, we have a significant, right, portion of students from the undergraduate population in the country enroll in our community colleges. And that includes particularly high numbers of students of color, as well as first-time freshmen. So if what others have found to be true about HIPs, and when they found this, it was mostly at four-year colleges and universities. If what they found there holds true for us at community colleges, then we certainly have much to gain, right, from using HIPs and trying to replicate the benefits of it by doing quality implementations of HIPs. So this should be like a motivation, right, to try to bring these particular practices into our teaching. And then for the general mathematics community, right, for all the math instructors out there, some of you may be familiar already with the PCAST report. That's the President Council for the Advancement of Sciences and I'm not even sure on technology, the PCAST. I have it somewhere. Let me actually look at the full name of the council. There we go. So PCAST stands for, everybody talks about it as PCAST, so it's hard to remember. Yeah, it's the President's Council of Advisors, not advanced, but of Advisors on Science and Technology. So that was it. We just call it the PCAST. They produced a report in 2012. It was a report to the president, then Obama. And they were simply, you know, saying what people already knew, that we are not well prepared to maintain our position in the world as leaders in terms of technology and innovation, unless we improve our STEM workforce. And one of the things that they claim in the report is that we are not doing a good job. Like traditional mathematics courses, I'm just reading from the slide, have been found to be the most significant barrier to degree completion for all fields in STEM. And this PCAST report of 2012 have multiple recommendations. This one in particular is about teaching. And they say we gotta do better. They encourage everybody to use active learning. And they also highlight the importance of engaging students, because it is the engagement, the one that promotes deeper learning. And they definitely claim that this is based on research, because everything they claim in the report was based on research, that all these other more active, more engaging teaching strategies are better than lectures. Now, we weren't doing that well back then. We're not doing any better yet. There is a report that came out in 2015. It's actually part of the Common Vision. It's a report that was produced as a really nice small book. And it was produced by efforts from multiple professional organizations. I know that AMATIC, the Association of Mathematics of Two-Year Colleges, the AMS, the MAA, Cyan, the American Statistical Association, all of them were part of that project and producing that Common Vision document or booklet or report, whichever way you want to call it. And what they said about what we're doing is even more depressing, right? They say traditional mathematics courses have been found to be the most significant barrier, not just to degree completion in STEM fields, as we already knew from 2012, but degree completion for all fields of study. So there is a lot of movement in the mathematical community. Actually, as early as 2012, the AMS prepared a response to the PCAST report, especially addressing one of the suggestions that was made in the report that maybe other disciplines are going to have to offer their own math courses, like design and offer their own math courses based on the needs of their students in their disciplines, based on career paths. So the AMS had a very, very strong response to that. And many professional organizations have been working together to modernize the mathematics curriculum, to better prepare the next generations of educators and college mathematics instructors, and simply, right, to make sure that mathematicians are the ones taking care of these issues. Like we are putting ourselves ahead of the pack, taking ownership of the problems, and also being the ones who propose solutions. So with that said, I'm gonna leave it at that. And I'm gonna look forward to our live section of the Café con Leche. Thank you.